Welcome to Live with Living Cities, where we explore the ideas, strategies, and relationships shaping more equitable systems in cities across the country. Today's episode is a special one. We're bringing you a playback of a recent Living Cities webinar, the first in our series, Rewiring Capital for Inclusive Local Economies. This one's titled Beyond Silos: How Cities Build the Relationships Small Businesses Actually Need. Originally hosted on Thursday, February 19th, this conversation focused on something that is often overlooked in discussions about small business support: the power of relationships. Too often, we talk about small business ecosystems only in terms of programs, capital, or technical assistance. But this webinar highlights a deeper truth. Stronger outcomes for small businesses are also built through coordination across city departments, intentional partnerships with community-based organizations, and the trust that grows when systems work together instead of isolation. Too often, we talk about small business ecosystems only in terms of programs, capital, or technical assistance. But this webinar highlights a deeper truth. Stronger outcomes for small businesses are also built through coordination across city departments, intentional partnerships with community-based organizations, and the trust that grows when systems work together instead of in isolation. Drawing on examples from Kansas City and Nashville, this conversation explores how the relational groundwork behind these ecosystems, not just formal initiatives or funding streams, helps create access to information, shared understanding, and the kind of connected environment that allows small businesses to become investment-ready and participate more fully in local economies. You'll hear insights from an outstanding group of speakers: Andrea Blackman, Chief Impact Officer for the City of Nashville; Alicia Levels-Moore, Main Street America consultant and owner and founder of ASL Creative Firm and Polaris; Shayla Nelms, Senior Associate for Local Impact and Innovation at Living Cities; and Nia Webster, Assistant Director in the City of Kansas City's Neighborhood Services Department. Together, they unpack what it really takes to build healthier small business ecosystems and why the relationships behind the work matter just as much as the resources invested in it. So, whether you're a local government leader, community partner, practitioner, or simply someone thinking about what it takes to build stronger local economies, we hope this conversation offers both practical insight and inspiration. Let's get into it.
Welcome, everyone. We are really glad you are here. I'm Shayla Nelm, Senior Associate on the Local Impact and Innovation team here at Living Cities. And today we're focusing on something that often goes unnamed, but it's foundational, which is the role that city government plays in shaping the relationships that determine whether a small business can truly thrive in a community. So, joining me today, we have three leaders who are doing this work every day. We have Nia Webster, Assistant Director for the Neighborhood Services Department in Kansas City, Missouri. We have Alicia Levels-Moore, founder of ASL Creative Firm, Polaris, Vanguard Development Collective, and consulted with Main Street America. And we have Andrea Blackman, Chief Impact Officer for the City of Nashville, Tennessee. And we'll hear from them shortly, but first, I want to ground us in why this conversation truly matters. And at Living Cities, we've been partnering with cities across the country for more than 3 decades. And through that work, including our City Accelerator initiative, we learned something important: is programs alone do not build strong local economies. How the system functions across departments, across sectors, across partners, that's what really truly determines whether entrepreneurs succeed. And when we talk about ecosystems, right, we're talking about the interconnected web of organizations and their people, their policies, the data, the incentives they have to work with others, to work together, their day-to-day practices. And that all shapes whether entrepreneurs can start, can grow, can access capital and scale. And one of the core principles that we named in our City Accelerator implementation guide is this: cities are uniquely positioned as ideal ecosystem builders. And I know that's like, gotta take it in because it feels like one more thing that we're adding to the work that you do, but it's true. cities are the ideal ecosystem builders. And it's not just because they fund initiatives, but because municipal government sits at the center of policy decisions, of regulatory processes, of data, of convening power, and ultimately public accountability. And ecosystem building means aligning all of those pieces intentionally, like alignment in action. It means public agencies, community based organizations, capital providers, and business leaders are not just working in proximity, but are working toward shared priorities. So entrepreneurs can receive the targeted support that helps them to actually succeed. And it means that city departments are not pulling in different directions. It means economic development isn't just trying to grow businesses while another agency, we've seen it happen, is unintentionally creating barriers. It means that you are clear about roles. It means you're clear about data sharing, on agreeing on definitions, even something as basic as what counts as a small business, right? And building trust that survives and outlives leadership transition. And all that is because when ecosystems function well, companies don't just survive, they scale. And while individual entrepreneurs benefit, the larger goal is really building a stronger market overall. And a well functioning ecosystem really fuels economic prosperity for existing residents and makes a city more attractive to investors. And it becomes easier to do business there, right? Capital flows more efficiently, there's greater access to opportunity. Um, but here's the reality: many cities coordinate. Yes, coordination, little hype word. Departments will meet, programs, a bunch of them are launched, task forces, all 25 of them are formed. And yet, small businesses still experience the friction. They navigate multiple offices, they get bounced back and forth, they receive inconsistent guidance, and they struggle to access capital. And most often than not, they're operating in neighborhoods where policies did not even take them into account. So the question, right, is not simply, do we have programs? Because, yeah, 20 of them. The questions are we aligned, right? Is our city aligned? Because coordination is not the same as alignment. Alignment looks like a shared understanding, aligned incentives, aligned clarity of roles, departments not pulling in those different directions, data informing decisions across different agencies, and trust that survives the leadership transitions. And one thing that we've seen through our Breaking Barriers to Business work is that money alone does not fix misalignment, right? You can't throw money at misalignment. Capital really works best when the ecosystem is ready for it. Data alone does not create change. Tools alone does not build trust. And policy without input from community will not work. So when money moves without ecosystem capacity and investment readiness, some businesses will benefit, but many, many others are left behind. And that's not a funding problem, right? We were saying money's moving. It's not a funding problem. That is a systems problem. And ecosystem building is not this one time initiative, it is long term work. Um, but it requires flexibility. It requires the willingness to correct the course when something isn't working. And it requires being able to respond to shifts without losing sight of the long-term inclusive growth that you're seeking. So today, I know that was a whole bunch, but today we're going to explore what alignment actually looks like in practice. And first, we'll hear from Nia Webster about the internal alignment inside city government and how shared data and shared definitions change how departments operated and advocated for small businesses. Then we're going to turn over to Alicia Levels Moore, who will speak from the perspective of the intermediaries, right? The folks helping out entrepreneurs and the entrepreneurs, and what it takes for cities and community based organizations to really build the trust and manage that tension and friction and strengthen their investment readiness. And finally, we will be hearing from Andrea Blackman, and she will really help us zoom out to governance and what it means to center people in decision making, what it means when ecosystems aren't ready, and how cities can build the capacity and the trust necessary for investment. So, as you listen, I really want to invite you to hold to one question. For what reason, right? How does this strengthen local economy? For what reason? How does it improve capital readiness? For what reason? How does it expand real opportunity for residents? And how does it make it easier for folks to navigate systems, specifically entrepreneurs? Um, the entrepreneurs that we say we want to support, right? Like all of that, for what reason? Because when cities get this right, when the relational infrastructure is strong and systems are aligned, capital works harder and goes further, and opportunities expand, and growth overall becomes more inclusive, right? So, with that, we are going to look up how this actually showed up in a real city, starting with Nia. And I have a quick question, Nia. Um, when did you realize that coordination wasn't enough? And what changed inside city government as a result? So please.
Ooh, when was coordination not enough? So I come from a small business background, was raised in a household of entrepreneurs, kind of saw it from the other side. But when you come into government after being on the other side, criticizing it about what it was doing right and what it was doing wrong, and you get inside, you're like, okay, well, we're siloed. We don't have systems that talk to each other. Although we may convene at times, or when council makes us convene, or we're directed by a city manager to do something, there were so many things missing in how we actually solved whatever issue it was or address whatever effort, whatever direction was being given. So just simply convening or just talking to each other was like, okay. But then there were so many other things that were missing to say, how do we make better decisions? How do we better inform? So that we are actually doing something that has impact versus just doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results.
Thank you. I love that. So, it wasn't a problem of, the programs weren't in place. It's just there's things that are missing, but we're all unaligned and we can't get to the results because people are not connecting. There's no conversations happening. There's no alignment. So, thank you for that. And please, I know you have some stuff to share with all the attendees today. So, take it away.
My name is Nia Webster. I work with the city of Kansas City, Missouri. There is a city of Kansas City or Wyandotte County, KCK. We are two different cities, and we got two different things going on right now with each other. I want to make sure I clarify that before we move forward. Today, I'm going to briefly run through with the short amount of time that I have to kind of give you a quick overview of what we've been doing with the city and how we're working with data, policies, and how that's improving or influencing the programs that we're doing, and how I'm trying to figure out how to link this in and figure out what is our role as a city government in the ecosystem, because we're not the end all be all. I'm not the consultant that advises you. I may be able to impact access to capital, but where do we actually fit and where we can have the biggest impact versus just kind of being everywhere and doing everything based on what people think we should do versus what we actually know how to do and which we actually can do within the limits that we have. A couple of things I'm going to review with you really quickly is one, I'm going to just briefly touch into where we're at with our data dashboard around business data. We had a small business task force, which helps to push this comprehensive plan. Like, what is the plan for small businesses in Kansas City? And then something we're kind of doing right now to kind of prepare our businesses for World Cup, when grab my scarf, which is our storefront vacancy program, which is really an economic development initiative for small businesses. So a couple of things to start with is, one, we were able to push forth a small business task force. I got money from Kaufman Foundation to do a lot of deep dive and research to bring forth a comprehensive plan. That is currently in draft and being prepared to be presented to council to be adopted. As we were working on that plan, on the side, you will see a lot of policy and initiatives that have been in action, starting from when we were in COVID and establishing a capital fund for our small businesses post-COVID to help them recover, establishing a task force, looking at anti-displacement, setting up the dashboard. So these are actual ordinances and or resolution numbers that that are associated with different initiatives that we've been doing. The mayor's outdoor dining grants helped us to address and kind of really see more clearly where are our sit-down eateries and where is infrastructure available for them to expand into outdoor dining. And we discovered a lot of things with that as well. We have initiatives for a temporary moratorium on outdoor dining fees, which could typically cost our businesses $1,000 or more a year to renew or to get set up in order to do outdoor dining. And then these were things that we were thinking about of how we kind of compare businesses for the World Cup. We worked with DoorDash on an accelerator. And then right now, our biggest program would be our storefront vacancy program, which is a pilot looking at those other cities like Seattle or San Francisco that were addressing commercial revitalization in their downtown areas. Starting with the citywide business data, these are some of the areas or departments or divisions I have to kind of tap into working with our data KC office. So I had the power of having a whole office dedicated to helping me build data, helping me build out a data dashboard. And they're leaning in with me with all the different divisions and things to pull data. The biggest thing is I don't have anything or I didn't have anything to really start with to inform council members of who's in their district, what type of businesses are in their district, what things they probably need to be advocating for based on the data that we're getting, what are the size of businesses in their district. I do get a lot of questions about, tell me or give me a listing of all the Black-owned businesses. Well, based on business licenses, they don't ask demographics. So I don't have that information, but I can at least say who's actually operating in our city. And then we can kind of work backwards from there, working with other agencies. The other big thing about data is I can share this with ecosystem partners so that they can advocate and get more funding and not be so lenient on the city to be a funder versus philanthropic organizations that do fund different efforts of our ecosystem or our ESOs or BSOs within our ecosystem. So I know we can only go so far. What other things can I do that supports our partners, doesn't step on their toes, but also gives us good things that we need to make better decisions as well. And this type of data helps me understand who they are, where they are they growing? Are they going into spaces? Are they home-based? What type of businesses are we seeing a lot of registrations in? So it gives me behavior and different things. And you can break down the data in so many different ways. And it also leads into how we can do better policy reform. Just to give you a snapshot of what we were able to pull, which took like almost a year and a half. Oh my God, it was like nightmare. But we were able to get some things from data from our finance department, which oversees our business license data. What we were also trying to figure out and address is how do we actually define small businesses? And if we go off the SBA definition, everybody's a small business. That doesn't really help us at a very local level and giving us hyper local data to understand where they are. What is most glaring to me in this data that you're looking at right here, based on how we're breaking it down, we have an excessive amount of micro businesses. We have a gap in them jumping from micro into a small business of 11 or employees or more. That tells me there may be something missing in our ecosystem where I can see, that we're pushing more for startups and not doing enough to help with business growth. So this actually helped influence the different recommendations that were in our comprehensive plan to be able to support growth in anything that we're doing. One other thing that we were looking at is funding. Like, how do we fund efforts? Everything costs money. One recommendation that was given to us was looking at a tax revenue redirect, but we didn't have revenue data about the impact that small businesses were having when it comes to sales tax revenue. We're coming up on a World Cup. That's going to be even more prevalent when we are looking at data and then looking at opportunities to maybe redirect any type of funding or revenue that we've seen from major events like this to be able to support small businesses now and in the future. One of the other big initiatives, like I said, that we're doing right now is called Open Doors. We were looking at cities like Seattle, San Francisco, and there's a lot of smaller cities in between, especially right now, that are looking at ways through some type of lease subsidy or programmatic way of helping to match make businesses and artists into vacant storefronts. For Kansas City, we got hit when we did the NFL draft, which is very different than what we're seeing in the World Cup. But right now, this is about placemaking and how do I get businesses as close to where FanFest is going to be, where the activities are going to be downtown, and fill up vacant storefronts that we have that I can see that we just really haven't really pushed on. So this is a pilot program for us where we will subsidize the lease up to 80%, not to exceed a certain amount based on the square footage. We offer grants to the tenants that are going in there to help them with build out to get ready for World Cup. And we offer technical assistance. And some of the biggest things that we saw based on our application was access to capital, legal support with lease negotiations and many other different things. But those are some of the biggest glaring things that we saw just based on the data that we have right now of the applicants. So this right here is more of an economic development initiative that I'm trying to trick my EDC into doing, because we do nothing for small business attraction and retention. This, I believe, is a key way in doing so, where we can retain our businesses, maybe even enforcing things for legacy businesses to stay in place during construction or major events, and then supporting new businesses, whether they're local or coming into our market, that really support job creation. So these are just a couple of things that overlap in some degree, but are simultaneously moving around while we are building things and building efforts that really impact small businesses in our city. And that's my little quick presentation on that. So if you have any questions or any follow-up on anything, you can reach me here at nia.webster@kcmo.org.
Thank you, Nia. And that was a quick but loaded presentation. But I want to make sure I reflect a little on what I was hearing, because it's all really important. So the problem, right, wasn't that Kansas City didn't care about small businesses. You highlighted instead that coordination without systems and shared information keeps us stuck. That's what you said, pretty much. Like, without coordinating, we're stuck. You thought you were aligned, but you didn't have shared definitions, shared data. So it was kind of like y'all are operating from
Where?
different playbooks, right? One is playing
Right.
softball, the other one is playing football.
Yeah.
And what changed was not so much let's collect more data. You guys had data collection. What changed was, how do we use this data to create this shared understanding, right? You also spoke about how you clarified the definitions, how you guys were able to gather data from different places, because, for example, some demographics, some agencies are able to collect them and you guys are not. So how do you map this landscape with this shared data? And you were able to, what I feel like a highlight there is that you were able to really connect that information to, policy design and program design and what council conversations are happening, and including that, the storefront vacancy strategy tied to the World Cup, which I know you like to sprinkle amazing things that you're doing all over. I definitely have to always write that down. But that's a shift, right, from information to application. And really, the idea is that behavior change, that process, that system change wasn't informal, right? You codified how you were going to collect data, how you were going to brief council, how you were going to structure the small business task force, how you were going to design funding proposals using this data, and ultimately how you're going to advocate for general funding dollars in this deficit year.
Yes.
And that's really relational infrastructure in practice. And what the outcome isn't just like, oh, it came out of the blue, right? It's not abstract. It means businesses are being placed intentionally in corridors where this opportunity is going to be concentrated in. It means that council members understand what small businesses actually look like in their district. And it means that when you ask for an investment for a district, you're doing it from this shared data as the foundation for the ask. And when I'm thinking of like looking ahead, that shared foundation really makes it possible for future capital, whether tied to the World Cup, major events, or any other major event, to really be deployed more strategically. And that's really what internal alignment and strengthening the investment readiness for a city looks like. So thank you so much for sharing.
You're welcome.
Now, Alicia, I want to make sure I kind of do a little pivot, because we spoke about data, but from inside, City Hall and what that looks like on the ground. But when cities, get clear internally, when definitions and data are aligned, what changes does that bring for entrepreneurs and the community-based organizations that support them? And I know you work directly with them, so please take it away with that perspective.
Yeah, so I'll answer that question, then I'll jump right in. So what happens is it makes it more clear and more accessible for entrepreneurs, right? To be able to navigate all of the things they have to navigate within a city and within a system. And so I'll start off by saying this. I'm in the South, so I like a little interaction. I'm a storyteller. So I'm going to be sharing some stories and I'll be asking some questions with my time. I promise I won't go over. But as I'm asking those questions, if you all want to answer in the chat, feel free. But yes, it makes it very clear for them when all those systems are working together. So this is kind of the picture I want to paint to also answer that question. So imagine an entrepreneur, right? She's operated for years. She has customers. She employs 3 people and she wants to expand. So what happens when she walks into a city office and she's told she needs more documentation? What happens when she goes to a business support organization and she's told to attend a few more workshops, right? What happens when she speaks with a lender and they tell her she isn't quite investment ready? The problem with that is that all the institutions, they're doing their best to support her growth, but no one is aligned. And that is the experience that most entrepreneurs are having, which is why we kind of have this data all over the place. People are getting business licenses. Sometimes they're not. We don't know what they're doing and where they are because the processes are not aligned. And so the entrepreneur in this example, she doesn't lack vision. It's just that the ecosystem lacks coordination, right? And so that's really where our work with B3 began. And I think the important question for all of us to ask ourselves is not necessarily if the entrepreneur is ready, but if the ecosystem is ready for our entrepreneurs and our small business owners. So that really is the heart of the B3 initiative, which I have the privilege and honor to be able to support Main Street America and leading our 5-city initiative. So we're working across the Southeast in Miami, Memphis, Nashville, Atlanta, and Charlotte. And I see some of our Atlanta and Charlotte folks on here. So hello, everybody in Miami. But B3 focuses on really strengthening the relationship between city government and our business serving organizations. I think a lot of times when we think about the work and even how Nia mentioned, we operate in silos, but the same thing is true for organizations that support business owners, right? So the thought process is, we approach it with a 3-prong approach. So we look at it through capital, narrative, and policy. And the approach is really clear. So the thought process is what happens when we bring the right entities to the same table and we align them around shared barriers, and we work through policy, we work through capital, and we work through narrative. Right. And it's really key because a lot of times it was made mention earlier, you have some folks, if they're not in city government, they're always mad at the city. Right. And then you have city government creating all of these programs and they're like, no one wants to do it. No one's applying, right? So there's this disconnect between what the city is trying to do and there's this disconnect between the work that's happening on the ground. And so the thought process is, what does it look like when these two entities are at the same table, co-laboring together to create solutions? Because the reality is, city government needs people and the people need city government. So we can't work in silos. We have to work together. But most importantly, the thing that we've been able to really dig into is to start measuring the relational infrastructure that makes everything possible. And I think that's really key as I kind of dig deep a little bit more into how capital really flows and how it's really connected to relationships. And so the question I ask a lot in this process, and I challenge you all to ask, is what changes when the city and our business serving organizations show up together and they show up differently than they have before, right? So we have some of our folks on Charlotte on the call. And so one of the things that was really amazing is Charlotte was doing some great work, doing great work now, even before the B3 initiative came. But one of the things that was really key, not only in Charlotte, but across the Southeast, was convening our city leaders and our BSOs together, not just for them to update, not status update meetings. No one wants another meeting. I can attest to that, right? But really, we gather them together, not for updates, but for alignment, right? So what does it look like to align what I'm working on as a city? What does it look like to align what is important and what's happening in our communities? What does it look like when our meetings are aligned that way? And a lot of times you will need an intermediary because the city is busy doing what they need to do. Business serving organizations are on the ground every day trying to figure it out. And so it's really important to have an intermediary there to convene folks, to help set a shared agenda and to develop a plan that helps everybody to work together more collectively and more cohesively. So even in Charlotte with the work they're doing and across the Southeast, the questions that we asked were, who's serving the corridor, right? Where are the gaps? Where are things being duplicated, and who else needs to be here at the table, right? So sometimes we're having conversations and everybody's not at the table. And sometimes we're like, well, I don't want everybody at the table. Well, that's the challenge, right? So we have to get everybody at the table, because when all of those voices are centered, we now can create solutions that everyone has buy-in, right? So the beautiful thing about the cohesiveness of the city working together with business serving organizations, when we think about capital, is when the city shows up as a partner first, not a regulator, the conversations begin to change, right? And trust is increased. So one of the things that I really kind of think about is, I talked about all of that, but it's like, okay, how do you do it? Right? Like, how do you put that in place? It sounds great, but how do we do that? So one of the things that we created in our process to hold this behavior in place was we developed something called a barriers matrix, right? And we developed that for our business serving organization. So the barriers matrix, it helps corridors identify a few things: to identify structural barriers, like real live barriers that exist to business owners being able to thrive in their local economy. It also helps to identify capital that's needed. It helps to identify capacity gaps. And it also helps to identify the coordination that needs to happen. And so before any project, any fun initiative or tough initiative takes place, we filter that through our barriers matrix so we can ask ourselves the right questions. And again, one of the key questions that I think is really key is, who else should be at the table? And we try to ensure that business serving organizations are not just developing things through their own lens, but also when they're developing things, they're saying, who can be my champion at the city? Who at the city needs to know that we're actually doing this? Because sometimes folks can be upset because they're like, hey, this entity doesn't care or this entity doesn't care, but sometimes they just don't know. So we have business serving organizations to develop their solutions to also consider who at the city, who in different entities or organizations need to be involved and need to be aware of what we're doing. And so the next part of that barriers matrix is knowing that we have to go beyond a tool. So you have a really great tool, that's our start, but nothing moves outside of policy, right? And so we have the capital, we have the narrative, and we have the policy, because remember, that's the three things that we're looking at this through. So one of the things I'm sure everyone can attest to is that policy, it helps to codify the collaboration that has to exist. Policy helps to embed coordination into the process. And truly, because we all have worked in different systems, that job titles, roles, they change, right? So policy ensures that alignment can outlast personalities, it can outlast who's sitting in a seat, and it can outlast job titles. And so you have this theory and this knowing that everyone has to be at the table. Then we have to develop a tool, right, which is our barriers matrix. And then we have to get intentional about how do we codify what we've built in this tool. And that's where we're really focused in on policy. Because one thing that is really key that we'll kind of get to with my last couple of minutes is, capital is not just deployed, right? It's not just deployed, but the relational foundation is really what helps capital to be deployed. Because capital without trust is not going anywhere. I'm sure all of us can attest that the better relationships you have, the easier it is for things to get done. And so one of the things I really want to kind of challenge us on is how we are measuring things. Because again, when we think about city government, we think about business serving organizations, and we think about the goal of serving entrepreneurs, everything moves at the speed of trust. And I think there's an opportunity for us to begin to look at, should we measure relational infrastructure? Right? And what is relational infrastructure? Well, what is that? So that's looking at how much trust is built, how much cross referrals are happening amongst organizations. That is looking at the relationships formed. That's looking at collaborative initiatives launched. I think that in this work, we sometimes forget that the things that feel intangible are really the things that make it thrive. And trust and relationships are really important because, again, capital is going to move where it's trusted. And that is a real thing. We've all been on the phone, and because someone trusts us and they like us, they move quicker, right? And so I think that it's important for us to think about measuring that, because if we don't measure it, we don't see the true value in it. And we've seen in this work that that is a key for being able to get cities and communities to work together. Because the reality is, you could be across the table from folks and you know that you really need to get something done. But a lot of times there are layers and layers of experiences that people have had before they've gotten to you. And so sometimes it's not the process. It's not that we have too much data. It's not even that we have too many programs. It's that people are sitting across the table from people they don't like. And so if we can help to really dig into that and use relationships and realize that those things also play a part in capital moving and ecosystems working more cohesively together, I think that that will support it. So, for example, as I close, one really great example is Miami. Miami, this alignment led to the development of the Commercial Acquisition Fund. Everything isn't easy. It takes a little time, but I think what made Miami so special is that, and what made the fund possible is because each entity began to understand its role. Each entity respects the other's authority, and then each entity began to see itself as interdependent, right? And I think sometimes we think, you can't do it without me, and you can't do it without me. I mean, we can, and that's why we're seeing what we're getting now. But if we look at ourselves as interdependent, we'll realize that we all have a really important part to play. And I think that is what we're seeing play out in Miami with this Commercial Acquisition Fund. Because again, capital without trust, it doesn't deploy. And so these entities had to begin to trust each other. They had to begin to think about what it looks like for their communities to succeed. And then we started to get the Commercial Acquisition Fund, right? Which is all about ownership, right? Which is all about legacy. And so some of the deep work that we want to do, and we are doing and will continue to do, again, is all about empathy. And I think that sometimes when we're thinking about this work, we have to learn how to collaborate with empathy and realize the work may take a little longer, but it'll last longer. Right. And that's the key. And I think even with the work that we get to do with B3 and the support that we get from True, is we appreciate that support because it allowed us to take our time to do the work with empathy, to realize that we're working in all type of environments with all type of experiences that people have had before. And yes, it might take longer, but what I do believe about everybody on this call is that we want the work to last longer. And so we have to be okay with that. Sometimes it takes a little bit of empathy, because truly what happens is when we do that, we move cities, business serving organizations, nonprofits. We move from being competitors to being co-architects. And that is the goal, to co-architect things together. And it helps us to move and to design things more intentionally for impact and make it more durable. So again, just as I close, the key things I want to just highlight is the importance of working together. So our cities, our BSOs, realizing that trust building is key. There are tools to do that. And I think that it's important for us to start thinking of new ways to measure and value relationships built, because again, everything moves at the speed of relationships.
Thank you, Alicia. I appreciate what you mentioned, especially the last little bit of becoming co-architects. And I similar type of language I like to say is, the alignment in action, which is a quick nod to our most recent impact report for Living Cities. But ultimately, what you illustrated is really that tools alone don't fix the ecosystems, right? You need trust. You mentioned empathy, and the problem you named wasn't like the lack of programs; it was the fragmentation, right? In the what's happening, the ecosystem lacking alignment. And I think you mentioned this important question for all of us to ask ourselves. You said, if the entrepreneurs is not necessarily if entrepreneurs were ready, but if the ecosystem is ready for entrepreneurs and our small business owners. And that is huge. Is the ecosystem ready? Are we there yet, right? There could be communities asking like, hey, where did the money go? A lot of it is that city departments are working with good intentions and they're creating all these programs, but there's no visibility. There's no coordination in saying, hey, community serving organizations, this is what we have out. Pair with the businesses in your corridors, So we have also these businesses serving entrepreneurs, but even they themselves are struggling to navigate systems because those didn't move at the same speed as them. So really, a big ask from what you mentioned or shared was, how do we really measure relationships, and what changes when the city is and the community, right, and community-based organizations come together? And we need everybody at the table to ensure we have buy-in. A city needs to show up as a partner first, not just the let me lay down the law. And then you mentioned this barrier matrix tool, and what is clear is that the tool only works because of the relationships that got built underneath it. And it wasn't just introduce a matrix and call it a day. It was really creating a shared responsibility. And you asked, like, who can be my champion with this shared responsibilities, right? BSOs were able to say, like, hey, these are the solutions we need. Each solution identified which department in the city needs to be part of this, right? Each department has a champion, a person that could lead that. And it really created that shared accountability. And I love that word nowadays. It's a little bit of a hype model, like the shared accountability, but it's true. And that accountability is what really begins to shift policy that will outlast the people, even the ones that are sitting at the table. So thank you for that, because it really challenges us to consider how we measure relationships, right? It's like, what's the checklist look like? What are the measurable indicators? Sorry, I can't talk. Measurable indicators, not like, the extra fluffiness, but really is like, how do we measure relationships? How do we measure collaboration? How do we measure trust? And this really helps that, because at the end of the day, it all matters. Relationship, trust building, empathy, it all matters, because when relationships are strong, the collaborative initiatives that you spoke about really happen. And the outcome isn't just like a better process. It's really the longer lasting corridor investment, right? We want the long term. It's a longer lasting corridor investment, and businesses are positioned not just to receive the funding, but to build long lasting stability for the businesses within their corridor. So thank you. And all of that got me thinking over, and just being able to take it a step further when it comes to um, thinking about governance, right? So Nia showed us internal alignment when it comes to data, and Alicia, you showed us cross sector alignment, bringing in entrepreneurs and community based organizations. Um, but when we think about governance itself, and I want to bring on Andrea. Andrea, this is a question for you, um, which hopefully leads into what you're going to be sharing with us today. But the question is, like, really, what happens when a city realizes that the ecosystem that we've been speaking about isn't fully ready? Or, how do you build with that not so ready, almost ready? How do you build with it, within the work that you do?
Thank you, Shayla. I love this question, right? What do we do when we're not ready? Since the pandemic, we have been conditioned to be ready, to be prepared in this age of preparedness. What do? We pivot. We pivot and we make that pivot part of a practice. And so that's what we did here in the city of Nashville, realizing that we may or may not have been ready for all of the capital that we were trying to deploy to our corridor. But what do we do and how do we position ourselves in that readiness? We make the readiness part of the process. So that's my short answer. And now I have the pleasure of telling you how we did that in our city in Nashville. I was so moved by first, let me just say how excited I am to share space with both Nia and Alicia. So I am fangirling right now on the work that they've been able to do. But hearing them both talk about the alignment and the co-governance, it speaks truly dearly to what we've been trying to do here in Nashville. So let me paint you a picture of the city of Nashville. We may be known for Music City USA and our music legends, but we're also known for our civil rights leaders as well, and our civil rights history and our legacy. And that also impacted how we approached going about co-governance and building trust and getting our city ready. We are known and we have called ourselves Athens of the South. We've called ourselves Music City USA. We've called ourselves Hot Chicken Capital, Foodie City of the South. I guess Miami Charlotte may disagree, but that's what Nashville has called herself. We've called ourselves Nash Vegas. We've called ourselves the It City, the bridesmaids capital of the country. We have called ourselves everything except for a prepared and ready city. And so I say all that to say, to give you a backdrop of how we looked at our methodology for assessing our city's readiness for a transformative approach of how we do government, right? How do we serve and act and be government? How do we show up in government as a practice, transformational government as a practice, and not transactional and not transitional? So the first thing we wanted to do, we had to realize that every approach to communication with our communities and our local government, that we had to look at each individual approach as its own intervention, as its own invitation. And so it was an invitation for us to acknowledge the historic harms and the missteps that government did in the cities. And we'll talk a little bit later about interstates, and we know what happened in every city, every town, USA, with an interstate going through its neighborhood. But we had to pause and actually acknowledge that as a government, acknowledge that historic harm. We had to wrestle with what happens when our leaders have one agenda and our community has a totally different agenda. And we had to be comfortable in sitting in that discomfort and have those conversations of how do we go about course correcting systems. Shayla, you mentioned systems earlier. So this was an invitation for us to institute what co-governance looked like on a large scale. It was an invitation for us to center people, to center communities over policy, over progress, and even over an agenda, and Nia, over data trends, right? We had to pause for just a minute because data would tell us one thing, but what happens when that data does not align with what our communities, our business owners, and our businesses needed? So we moved through that process by simply stepping in. We moved we believe that our communities shared our same value, right? That was our first assumption. We believe that. We also believed that our cities and our businesses and our corridors, that they were ready for a nuanced approach of how we examined collective decision making, how they were ready for investment readiness. And after engaging hours and hours and months with business leaders and government leaders, we knew we had to take a step back and do some really deep introspective work. Now, most people in government will not say that we do introspective work. Well, this is why I think the conversation is so important. And how do we shift? As Alicia said, we have to shift to measuring trust. We also have to shift with being more intentional. How do we do that? First, we had to delve deep into our city's ecosystem. We did that in two ways. We did that both internally and externally, right? And so before we launched a program internally called Listen, Understand, and Act, and before we even launched B3, it was important for us to really examine the history. Now, Shayla, you know, and some of you know that I am a historian by nature, and I promise I'm not going to go from the foundations of the government in this talk, but I have to at least give us some context. And so when we think about trust, when we think about co-governance, when we think about alignment and a city's readiness, we had to really own our mistakes. And so Nashville, one of the things we did in the early 20s is that our city leaders said that it is a wise decision. We're going to course correct, and we are going to fix the problem of the interstate coming through North Nashville, which is one of our corridors. We're going to fix it by creating a CAP and Connect program. So we're going to bridge the city back together. We know what the 1960s did. We know what urban renewal we did. We know what the I-40 came in with the construction, displaced nearly 1,400 people in one small neighborhood, which was our largest, most affluent Black neighborhood in our city. It's where our HBCUs, or it's where our civil rights leaders march. It is where Jimi Hendrix performed. It is how Nashville got Music City. We displaced these people and families with the interstate. So our city thought it would be great for us to course correct. So we decided that we would create a project based on the Biden administration giving money, $120 million. We were going to contribute as a city $48 million. We were going to create 1,200 jobs. We were going to course correct what we thought we knew and make sure that our city was prepared for. But guess what happened? Decades later, our cities, our businesses, and our communities said that is not what we want. So we weren't ready. We had a $48 million project that we were wanting to institute. Our mayor said that we are ready to build this bridge at the time. We had our health department and a city official leader saying that this is going to course correct environmental issues, but we weren't ready. We weren't ready because our communities weren't ready. We weren't ready because our business corridors were not ready. So what did we do? We had to do a little bit more deeper dive into our approach. First, we had to get a handle on what it means to actually be ready. And for us, this readiness came into two parts. It came both structural and also came with looking at psychological issues. So first, we had to get a handle on what it means to be ready. We learned that this readiness was both structural and psychological. So before we implement any new program, of course, we know we had to have the resources. We need to make sure that the policy are in place. We need to make sure, I think Alicia said, who's at the table, making sure, but we also had to look at the psychological impact. And that is where we spent the most of our time addressing the psychological impact on our city's readiness. And that took a lot of guts. It took a lot of courage, but I stand by it. Because I think it makes us better as a city, as a municipality, and as those who want to govern and usher in what it means to truly have a co-governance model as how we look at. We had to make sure that our neighbors, did they really want this cap in their neighborhood? Looking at all of the previous projects that didn't go as well, it would have been a nightmare for us to think that we can just increase fiscal capacity by giving money to these three corridors and never look at the other mitigating issues. And so what did we do as a city? We collectively decided to just take a back seat and listen. We took our government badges off. We did not come in as the experts. We decided that we would listen. It took us a while to get our business serving organizations in place because everything was shifting and pivoting. So one of the things we wanted to make sure that we had to listen. We listened to our community. So we created an insight and initiative exchange. And what that did for us as a process, as a practice, and as a new initiative, we wanted to make sure that we brought all of our businesses together to actually listen to them. So before we could deploy this money in this capital, guess what they told us? We don't feel safe. They told us that we need our trash picked up. How can our businesses thrive if we don't have the marketing that we need? Nashville prides itself, you heard me say, on being the it city, 100 people moving in every day. But that is not a shared experience for all of our businesses within the corridors. So within this Insight and Initiative Exchange series, we listened. We listened and we glean. And what did our businesses tell us? Well, they told us that we are not going to be able to stay in our businesses. The cost of living has gone up. I'm no longer going to be able to operate. I may have to move from a storefront to operate out of my house. Some of them told us that we are tired of trying to figure out the processes. There are at least 75 steps for wanting to do business with the city, getting a permit. How do we go about understanding codes? And so I'm proud to say that what we did, besides listening and creating this co-governance opportunity, that we actually took to heart of everything that our businesses told us. We were able to codify our work by putting some strong processes in place to help them. We helped them with creating step-by-step guides of how to do business with the city, step-by-step guides with Nia helped us on this. So Nia, another shout out to you and the wonderful work that you actually helped us do and figuring out what does this work really look like for our city in Nashville. We are not Kansas City, but we do know that we needed to put some processes in place as a structure. We decided that we would pause some of the major projects. And now that goes against administrations. That might go against an agenda. But we were courageous enough to say that if we are going to really, as Alicia said, build trust and continue to build this trust and create co-governance and co-alignment, then we had to put a pause on some of the major projects, $46 million for one of them, to make sure that we were actually going to be able to sustain any capital that we bring through to these corridors from beyond B3, beyond this mayor, beyond this government. And so our work and how we continue to codify that is to make sure that we sit and get comfortable in the pause, that we address the historic harms, that when we're measuring the readiness of our city before any project or deploying capital on any of these corridors, that we actually look at the readiness, both not only systems and structures, but also the psychological processes that have to go. We have to look at the psychological safety. I don't know how much time I have left, Shayla. I think I have like 1 minute left. And so in doing that and all of that in saying, I will say one of the things that we will continue to do is revamp how we measure success. And that is looking at our KPIs as a strategy. And Alicia, we have just decided this year to incorporate trust building in our KPIs and a strategy of our city. And you listed what those strategies might look like and what trust building looks like, but we want to formalize that process and that project.
Thank you, Andrea. I feel like I have to get a little because you said sit and get comfortable in the pause. I don't even do that in my daily life. But it's so true, right? We have to sit and get comfortable in the pause. And one thing that I've been hearing as a thread across all you guys speaking is that readiness wasn't part of the process. Well, making the readiness be part of the process, right? Because you guys weren't ready. But you also acknowledge the historic harm and you said, how do we course correct these systems, right? How do we course correct what we've done? And it was acting initially based on acting on incomplete data without that deep understanding of the history, of the harm, of not bringing the community along, not hearing what their needs are. And that will lead to friction, and especially when you're throwing millions of dollars at the idea of let's course correct here, let's slap this initiative 48 million, 38 million. But the community wasn't ready because there's also that psychological aspect that's needed for readiness, right? The psychological aspect is like, do I trust you? No, I don't. From their perspective, it's like, I don't want to do business with you, right? And I appreciate the idea of bringing people to listening sessions to really embed residents and business owners into a new process. You guys took time to really, what Nia was mentioning, understanding the landscape, this time not with data, but really with like, what do you guys want? This not numbers, but not quantitative, but qualitative data, right? And that led to the strategic planning and to decision making and to really having shift that is being codified. Sitting and getting comfortable with the pause. I feel like that's going to be my slogan for the new year because we need it. We need it. Personal life, work life as well. So a little bit of takeaways as I kind of reflect on all of your presentations here across the cities is that the problem, misalignment internally across sectors or between policy and the lived experience of people that has faced harm, like what folks go through, right? What changed among that is the shared definitions. We have clearer tools. We have structured partnership. We have intentional relationship building, right? And what's holding that change in place is really those data systems, the governance tools, codifying new practices, and creating accountability structures, right? You have to be accountable. And ultimately, the outcome is really that stronger economies where businesses are more prepared to participate, where capital works harder and goes further, as we mentioned in the beginning. And opportunity is not limited just to those who can access it, right? Not the big box stores because they already know how to make the system work. Positioned specifically for the small business, for the entrepreneurs. That's ecosystem building, and that's investment readiness. And that is really the difference between coordination and that relational infrastructure and how far that will get us overall. So thank you, ladies, for sharing and opening up and just being honest about the work that you're doing, being honest about some of the challenges and barriers that you guys had to go through as you navigate these systems.
Thanks for joining us today on Live with Living Cities. We're always thrilled to have you as part of these essential conversations about building a just and equitable society. Your time, curiosity, and commitment to change mean a lot, and we can't wait to have you back for our next episode. If you'd like to get involved in our work, visit our website at livingcities.org to learn more about the programs in the cities we're working with. Subscribe to this podcast to hear more stories from the front lines of change, and please, share this episode with others who care about closing the wealth gap in building a more equitable future for all. We'd also love to hear from organizations interested in becoming members of Living Cities. If your organization would like to join our coalition of changemakers, reach out to us at lcinfo@livingcities.org. That's LCINFO@livingcities.org with the subject line, Member. And before we wrap up, we want to extend a huge thank you to the incredible organizations that make this work possible. Living Cities is powered by a coalition of leaders and changemakers whose dedication and support drive our mission forward. We're honored to work alongside you in the movement to close the wealth gap and create lasting impact in communities across the country. Thanks again, everyone, for tuning in. Until next time, stay engaged, stay inspired, and let's keep working together toward a future where equity is a reality for all. I'm Justin Charles, and this has been Live with Living Cities.